Thomas Grayson was a man who owned everything money could buy but felt empty inside. As the CEO of a giant corporation, he had power, wealth, and fame, yet none of it could heal his broken heart. His marriage had fallen apart, his daughter hadn't spoken to him in years, and the weight of his choices pressed on him like a curse. On a cold, rainy afternoon, he sat alone on a park bench with his head in his hands, refusing to move even as the drizzle soaked his expensive suit. He felt he deserved the discomfort, a penance for a life lived selfishly. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the small figure standing before him until he heard a soft voice say, "Mister, you look sad. Wanna meet my mommy?" Confused, he lifted his gaze and saw a little girl no older than 6. She wore a faded pink raincoat, its zipper half broken, and held a battered umbrella that barely kept her dry. Despite her own struggles, she smiled at him with innocent concern. The simplicity of her question pierced through his sorrow. She didn't see a billionaire or a failure, just a sad man in need of kindness. When he didn't answer, she tugged gently at his sleeve, insisting he come with her. Thomas hesitated but found himself rising and following her down the cracked, wet sidewalk. She led him to a tiny, worn-down apartment where the air smelled of warm soup and hope. Her mother greeted him with genuine hospitality, offering dry clothes and a meal without asking for anything in return. For the first time in years, he felt human. Over dinner, he broke down and confessed his emptiness, admitting he was a billionaire who had forgotten how to care. The mother shared her own pain of losing her husband and vowing never to ignore anyone in need. That simple act of compassion transformed him. He left determined to help them, not as charity, but gratitude. Months later, he changed their lives and his own, proving that even the hardest heart can be softened by kindness. Thomas stared at the little girl, bewildered by her boldness. When he asked, "What?" his voice cracked with disbelief. She didn't flinch or shy away. Instead, she beamed at him with a gentle, almost painful warmth that felt like sunlight breaking through the rain. "My mommy says no one should be sad alone. You can come have soup with us," she offered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, he almost laughed, a short, bitter laugh at the absurdity of it. A billionaire CEO accepting a dinner invitation from a child in a cheap raincoat? But then he saw her eyes. They were impossibly open, sincere in a way adults forgot how to be. There was no pity, no calculation, only pure, honest compassion. He hesitated, shifting on the wet bench, pride and shame battling inside him. He should have said no. He should have waved her off. But before he could, she reached out and gently took his hand in her small, cold fingers. She tugged, insistently but kindly, as if determined to save him from himself. "Come on, mister. Mommy's nice." It wasn't a command. It was a promise. And for reasons he couldn't explain, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the loneliness, maybe the hope he barely remembered feeling, Thomas let himself be led. He stood up slowly, ignoring the wet squelch of his shoes, and followed her away from the empty park bench, down the cracked sidewalk, and towards something he didn't even realize he was searching for, a chance to not be sad alone. They arrived at a small, worn-down apartment building with peeling paint and cracked steps. The girl led Thomas up the narrow stairway without hesitation, still holding his hand. When she pushed open the door, he was hit by a wave of warmth and the comforting scent of herbs and simmering broth. It felt like stepping into another world, one untouched by boardrooms and cold negotiations. Inside, the girl's mother greeted him with a bright, genuine smile despite the deep lines of exhaustion on her face. She wore mismatched thrift store clothes but carried herself with a quiet dignity. "Hello. You're soaked. Please sit. I'll get you some dry clothes and soup," she said warmly, as if he were an old friend rather than a stranger dragged in off the street. He opened his mouth to protest, stammering that he was fine, that he didn't need anything. He was a billionaire, after all, used to being the one who gave, or more often, refused. But the words died in his throat. He was shivering, wet to the bone, and her offer wasn't charity, it was kindness without expectation. So he let her hand him a faded towel and accepted the steaming bowl of soup she placed before him. The girl sat beside him, chattering about school and her favorite cartoons, while her mother laughed softly at her stories. Thomas listened, spoon in hand, feeling the warmth seep back into his body and something gentler awaken in his heart. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had treated him like this, not as a CEO, not as a failure, but simply as a human being who needed comfort. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. He felt human. Dinner ended with the little girl curling up in her mother's lap, eyelids drooping as she yawned and mumbled half-formed words. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the rain tapping against the window. Thomas sat back in the rickety chair, holding the empty soup bowl in his trembling hands. He watched the mother gently stroke her daughter's hair, her eyes filled with love and exhaustion. The sight twisted something in his chest. Blinking back the sting of tears, he finally asked, voice raw, "Why would you help a stranger like me?" She looked up at him and smiled, not pitying, just gentle. "I know what it's like to be alone. After my husband died, people ignored us. They looked away when we were crying in public. I promised myself I'd never do that to anyone. I'd never ignore someone who looked sad." Her words cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal or headline scandal ever had. He felt something inside him crack wide open. All the deals he'd closed, the money he'd hoarded, the homes he'd bought, they suddenly felt like worthless trinkets next to this quiet promise of empathy. His voice shook as he lowered his head. "I'm a billionaire," he admitted, as if confessing a sin. "I thought I was better than everyone. But I'm the poorest man I know." She didn't recoil or gasp. She just nodded slowly, understanding in her tired eyes. And in that silence, with a sleeping child in the crook of her arm and the smell of leftover soup in the air, Thomas realized how desperately he wanted to change. When the evening drew to a close, Thomas rose reluctantly from the creaky chair, the warmth of the small apartment clinging to him like a memory he didn't want to leave behind. He looked at the woman holding her sleeping daughter, and his heart ached with gratitude he couldn't fully express. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek white business card, pressing it into her hand. "Call me tomorrow," he said, voice thick but steady. "I want to help you. Not charity, just a thank you." She looked at the card, hesitant, worry flickering in her eyes that it might come with strings attached. But then she saw the sincerity in his face and nodded quietly. She knew he meant it. Months later, Thomas Grayson kept that promise. He made sure they had a new, safe home in a better neighborhood, no longer damp and crumbling. He offered the mother a real job at his company's foundation, where her compassion and experience helped guide outreach programs for those in need. The changes didn't stop there. Inspired by that little girl's fearless kindness, the way she'd looked at a sad stranger and offered him hope, Thomas found the courage to call his own estranged daughter. Their first meeting was awkward, raw, but real. Over time, they began to heal. And Thomas Grayson was never the same man again. He no longer measured success by profits or headlines but by the lives he could touch. He learned that the greatest wealth isn't found in bank accounts or corporate towers, but in small acts of compassion that ripple outward in ways you can't predict. Because sometimes, it only takes one brave little voice saying, "You look sad, mister," to remind you that no one should be alone. And that a stranger's kindness can be exactly what saves you.